I'm your host, Shia, and I just wanted to hop on here. If you're visiting my channel for the first time, I want to welcome you. Do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe anytime so that you know when we're having new content that's going to be pushed out. If you're returning to the channel, my SB community, you already know what it is. We grinding out here in these streets and we roll deep. All right. So I want to thank you for joining me and returning back to the channel. This is a random live. This is a special live, but very random. And everybody is starting to comment on the Julius Randle interview on Paul George's podcast, and it was pretty interesting. It was pretty interesting. I think Julius Randle did himself well. You know, he did a decent job on it. But there was a couple things that really stood out after I watched the video, the interview in its entirety. And I wanted to pop on and just talk a little bit about what did stand out. So I gotta give you that my initial reaction when I had seen that this interview was being done with Paul George and then it was Julius. So I know Paul George is a Clipper. He's from LA. So I knew that the interview was in LA. And my first reaction in seeing this as something that was going to happen, or that they were going to, they did previews of it, and that it would go be available for everybody to watch in its entirety pretty soon. I had the same reaction that Sheik Luch had when the Locks versus Dipset. Let me look at these soft ass. Let me look at these pussy. You know what I mean? Like these soft. So that's all I kept thinking was just like, yo, this is the softest ass podcast. Because say what you will about Paul George. We know what Paul George's talent levels are, but that cat is soft as hell. He is soft as hell. Only thing missing on that show was Karl Anthony Towns. And you couldn't have had any softer of a panel than that. Julius is the more hardcore player. And that's 9 times out of 10 because he played with Kobe and that he's currently playing in New York. So his softness, like he said in the interview, and when Kobe was just, I can't play with these soft players, he said he wasn't soft that day. Like even that was just like, bro, you don't stress that day you wasn't soft, because it insinuates the rest of the days you soft. So that was my initial reaction when I saw that was a possibility, that was something that was being done. Then I was just like, oh God, this is going to be painful to watch because both these cats are soft as Charmin. So, but I did like what I was seeing. Julius got some points. I think it was decent. They covered a lot of points. It was a lot that was said through Julius's comments, through the questions that were asked by Paul George, and it was just some things that were confirmed through the responses and through the interview overall. And there's some things, that we had already suspected. But I don't think it was any absolute revelations from this interview. But I just wanted to talk about those things that stood out to me and gave me an interesting perspective in terms of how the questions were asked and how they were responded to as well. So just throughout, I'm trying to change my inner feelings about Julius. It's an everyday process. It's an ongoing process, man, because with interviews like this, and I knew that they were in Cali. I said before, Paul George is a Clipper and everything. And although Julius is from Texas, this kid is a Cali. Like he said, his favorite team was the Lakers. And that's one of the things, like you can tell that's the feel of it. And I think that's the reason that there is this unspoken or maybe even overly spoken disconnect between Julius and the New York fan base. He just feels like an outsider who's coming to work in New York. Although a lot of his words and sometimes he has moments where he's just like, yeah, New York is this and this is, and his goals are there. But he just feels like an outsider temporarily stopping by and he's going to work. It doesn't feel like he's home when we're talking about him being a New York Knick. That's the thing. And when I'm watching the podcast, that's what it feels. I mean, even if you look at him in terms of appearances on the podcast, he has the New York fit on, but he has the typical LA fit on. You know what I mean? Like that fit I don't know what they call. I think those are like, they used to be called like Dickies, like a Dickies uniform, top buttoned up. He looked real LA. So, I know I'm nitpicking, but once again, that's just the vibe. To give you a flip side of it, Carmelo Anthony is from Baltimore. He's from the DMV area. And you can't tell me Carmelo Anthony don't feel like New York. You know what I mean? So like that's what I mean. For the longest time, we had players who didn't want to come to New York because they were from other places and they vibed from those places they were coming from. And if you're not from New York, in addition to there being a New York bias, there is the stereotypes about New Yorkers. And with that generation, many of them are intimidated by that. So it's tough to get players to come to play in New York because you have to be able to vibe and connect with the energy that New York gives. You need to have some of that in you yourself. So it's not something that's make believe. Don't let people convince you that Knicks fans, we overly think about what New York is. No, we know it's a difference between not being born in New York, not being from New York, and then how you see New York versus coming up in it and knowing what to expect and being able to vibe with that and match that energy. So that's all I'm saying. It's an everyday struggle to try to connect with Drew. And we don't know in terms of the future what his future is going to hold in terms of him still being in New York. But until then, the challenge continues. All right, challenge continues. But something that I like, and I'm going to be all over the place with these points. They're not going to be in the same order as they were, brought up in the interview. But one thing that I like was the question that Paul George asked him about his time in New Orleans. And he said, you had the option to leave or stay while you were in New Orleans. And Julius' response was, he said, yeah, but no. He was like, yeah, but no. I did have the option to stay. He said, but that was the year they got the number one pick. He said that was absolutely the year they got the number one pick. And he said, and he knew that it was Zion's team. He said, I knew coming in, that was his team. So I had to kind of do what I needed to do for myself or whatever have you. To me, that point stood out because I'm like, the irony is that question is posed to him now. And it's happening during a time where there's a lot of chatter about Zion and rumors about him being moved. Finally, the Pelicans are open to trading him. And the fact that whether it's a rumor or a fact, Zion is like, I would prefer to be traded to New York. So he may very well still have his future tied to what Zion Williamson decides to do, or what is decided for Zion Williamson's playing future in terms of where he plays. And that could be New York, which could ultimately push Jules out. So I just thought that was some irony, some karma, or whatever you want to have talk about when it comes to that. Julius also talked about the difference between playing in New York and LA. So Paul Pierce, as well as the other co-hosts, I don't know who they were, but they was just like, yeah, so talk about how different it is. Like, what's the difference? And Julius, I like how he answered this. He said, I was young when I came into the league. He said, I got drafted by LA. They just won a championship in 2010. And he said it was laid back. It was super laid back. Part of it being laid back was he had that luxury of Kobe still being in the league. That responsibility, that weight doesn't fall on you. Your job is to go out there and just try to be a contributor, so you can play and learn. Him being in New York, he's at a different place in his life. So he talked about being in New York, they hadn't won in 50 years. So to come from LA, where they had just come off a chip, and coming to New York, they hadn't won in 50 years. Not only that as a fact, but the fact that he was in a different place and his role was different in both spaces. I like how he was mindful enough to answer that question. It was a good answer that he had given to Paul George, because Paul George had seemed to be leading him towards a response that kind of painted New York as being like a jungle, or whatever have you. And a lot of these questions, if I'm keeping it 100% with you, a lot of these questions, the way Paul George ask them the questions. I don't know if he's trying to be more considerate to Julius by asking these questions the way he did, or if it showed his insecurities and his concerns about playing in that type of market. It was I don't know, it was soft as hell. You know, it was almost like, it was sensitive as hell the way he was asking these questions. Where he was asking these questions like, yo, it gotta be different playing in New York. Like, you know, like if I had the chance to do it, I wouldn't do it. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I just kept, once again, Sheik Luch was my spirit human. I kept saying, yeah, soft ass question. Why are you asking me soft ass questions? Why are you asking that question like that? So that was my response. But also what I liked about Julius and the way he responded to the question as well was that he naturally lit up when he got to the point and he was talking about, if you win in New York, man, Paul George was like, yo, you know they'll build a statue for you if you win in New York, you know. And Julius lit up. He was like, yo, that's what I'm doing it for, bro. He was just like, if we finally get over the hump and win, and I'm paraphrasing, if you watch the video, he probably didn't use the same words, the same language, but basically he lit up, man. And that's something I will say about Julius. Since he's been here, every time he's been asked about the possibility of winning in New York, that has been his same natural reaction. His face lights up. You know, you could see it in his eye, like he could see the possibility of winning in this market. And it's not contrived. It's a very natural man. Like, you know, he sits up a little bit higher, and I love, that's a piece that I do love. Like, he does want to win at the highest level in New York. You know, I just think he can't get out of his own way to make it happen. But that piece I enjoyed. On the flip side, I also found it funny that Paul George, he asked that question and he talked about, he was like, yo, yeah, yo, you know, they'll build a statue for you. So he's saying this as a player who is considered at a point in time to be a superstar in this league, you know, or borderline superstar in this league, definitely, you know, a USA team, all of that. You know, he has the credentials and the accolades. But he's saying it like, hey, you know, if you win. So if this is common knowledge to you, you know, and if you're aware of this, then it's so funny because a lot of his questions was really, I don't know, either the tone or the actual language was speaking from a deficit lens about New York. You know what I mean? It was just like, yeah, well, no, almost like, you know, no matter what you do, you still can't win out there, you know? So Julius was super clear in his responses. And I like how, no matter how it seemed as if it was from a deficit lens, you're going to see in terms of my response to other points, Julius was like, the way he was responding, it was almost like you could tell that the mindset of the culture of playing in New York has changed. So that's the piece that I was really looking at. I started looking at Paul George with the side eye eventually. Because I'm like, all right, you know, we could tell you shook to play. So it's almost like I'm asking Julius how it is, because I don't think I could be able to endure a lot of what it is that Jules endured. So Julius made the comment also, and this is something that stood out to me. You know, he was talking about, he said his best years have come when he played with players that were better than him. And I'm like, yo, bruh, you should have said that. I mean, you should have said that. I appreciate your transparency, your honesty, because that's a hell of an admission. That's a hell of an admission. And it hit me several ways in terms of my understanding for it. Because he talked about when he was able to play with Anthony Davis. And he said he had one of his best years playing alongside Anthony Davis. So that was an admission that I know Anthony Davis is a better player than I am. But then he goes on, I mean, basically that statement, the type of season he had last year, that statement kind of proved that, all right, Jalen Brunson is a better player than you because it took a lot of the pressure off of you and you were able to have the type of season you were able to have. So, I mean, to me, it was honest, and that's one thing that you got to give him credit for. I think he goes on to discuss you know, just the environment and the value that Jalen Brunson brought to him so that he could just be himself. And once again, he doesn't have to go out and get his own shot. He doesn't have to be the one with that level of responsibility. But to me, right away, I think he talked about right away, JB made the game easier for him. He doesn't know what it is. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but he made it easier on him. And clearly what it was, because he did put his finger on it accurately, he was a better player. He allowed you to be able to do what you do, because what you do is not a 1A job description. It's not. You are not a number one on the team. You were number one on the team when we got you, but that's no longer your role. And it's that adjustment that needed to take place for him to understand that. It's still in the process, because now there's only two people who play at the same level and the talent level that they do. So what I say to that is, this leads me to this point. New York has two choices to make. The first choice is that they either have to trade Julius and bring in someone or people who combined equal the output that he gives to us, they're better. All right. And then secondly, the other option would be that you have to get rid of him. Or with him, you got to knock him down to the third best player on your team. So you got to get someone who is of equal skill set or better than Jalen Brunson. If you go according to what Julius just told you, that's where he plays at his best. So New York is going to have to look at what players can we bring in that's going to be equal or better than Brunson, so that Julius can do his particular job assignment at maximum capacity. All right. So I love that question. I think it evoked that realization. And when I say in the title that it helped us reinforce what it is that we already know, that's what I meant. You know, that to me, that admission for him was everything, because it's basically saying, like, Knicks fans, you could call us what you want, you could call us delusional, you could call us over the top, whatever have you. But we know basketball, we know what it is we see. We know what it is we see. And what we saw was just that. We're not saying he's a scrub. We're just saying that the conditions under which he came and he arrived to the city, he was relied on to, really utilize his skill set in order for us to be capable of winning games. That's not where we are anymore. So you can't still have the same mindset of who you are as a player and what your role is to this team that you had when you came in, when there's another player that's better than you. We need you to adjust. All right. Another point that I think Paul George brought up, he said, he talked about playing in the Garden, and the fact that there's a possibility that you get everybody's best. He was like, you ever get tired of getting everybody's best when you come into the Garden? And it was so funny. And I love how, because he said when you're going into games, you know that someone could drop 40 on any given night. And I love how Julius answered this question. I was really proud of him when he said that. He was just like, I never think that. He said, as a player, he was like, what? He said, I don't know where that would come from. I never think that. He said, if you think of it that way, the opposite is true as well. They could easily get 10 because they're overwhelmed by the environment. And I was just like, first off, it was almost like a trap type of question, and Julius passed with flying colors. But it speaks to what the mentality and the culture is of the team right now. For him to hear that type of question was just like, that's mad wow right now. Like, that's crazy. But from Paul George's perspective, that shows how they used to see us, and that shows how he sees being a player on the New York Knicks, which also speaks to that softness that I'm talking about, that shaman mentality. That's why you wouldn't want to come to New York, because you honestly believe that players are coming in and they're intending to drop 40, maybe because that was your mindset going in. And Julius said that. He said, I could see that. He said, because that's how I was thinking every time I showed up in the Garden. Well, that's because the team was trash. And if Julius Randle was like, every time I'm coming in the Garden, I want to go off, I want to have my best fit, that's when you know the shit's going to be sweet. That's when you know it's going to be a cakewalk. That's when you know the New York Knicks were trash back then. And that was the mentality of Paul George's generation, the LeBron era. And that's why I'm happy and excited that the sun is starting to set on that era. Because there's a whole new generation of NBA fans. There's a whole new generation of NBA players who are going to know the New York Knicks only as a team that's competitive, only as a team that has made the playoffs the last 2 out of 3 years, as a team who is on the rise. This generation of soft ass, I want to stay away from that spotlight. I don't want to be, I just only want to be connected with teams that win, but you ain't win nothing. They're retiring out. They are phasing out. And that's something that I looked at and I'm like, I'm proud of Julius for answering that question that way. When he was just like, yo, that could be, he said the opposite is true too. You could come in and get overwhelmed by the situation and only score 10. He said, next thing you know, you 2 for 15 and you arguing with your teammates who are like, pass the ball. You know what I mean? And we saw that take place with Darius Garland in the playoffs. That kid was scared ishless in the playoffs. Everybody was just like, yo, what's going on? This, that. You could see his eyes bug out. Like he was not himself. Darius Garland is a beast. And that kid was terrified in that moment. I won't say terrified because he did after a while kind of settle himself in. But he was rattled. He was clearly rattled. And I hadn't seen that in a long time. So I love the way Julius answered that question. He did it the right way, and he showed that their losing mentality ain't there in New York anymore with this team. That's exactly what he showed. He was just like, what? We don't think that. He said that never crosses my mind. And and for him to say that as one of the leaders, as one of the players on our promo as the star players, I was happy that he said that because he shows that there's a shift in New York. That was almost a got you question. That that a LeBron James, if he's at, that interview and he's answered those questions, he would have picked it up and picked it apart really quickly. He probably would have pointed it out. Like, why would you ask me that type of question? But Julius almost felt like, he answered with indignation, like I would never think that. And so I was proud of him for that. That's why I was just like, yo, he really comported himself well in that interview. I think it was either Paul George or his co-host who also said, after Julius responded that way, yo, I never thought about it like that. Of course not. You know what I mean? Like, that's so crazy. That's when they were so accustomed to the New York Knicks being a terrible team that it never would cross their mind that the opposite could be true. That going into that's how New York as the Mecca was not a thing for years. That they were so accustomed to everybody just shitting on the New York Knicks. That wouldn't even cross their mind that the opposite could be true, that the environment could rattle a player and throw them off. They're just so locked in on, it's an automatic 40, or I'm gonna go in there and make a name for myself. I said it in videos historically, and I think it fell on deaf ears. Almost kind of like, that's not a thing, especially to the new generation. Once again, even the new generation of Knicks fans don't know the New York, the Madison Square Garden to be disruptive to star players. They don't remember when the New York Knicks had like 25 game winning streak at home, and Michael Jordan came out and broke it, that streak by winning on like a last second play, and he ran out of the Garden because he was so excited that they gotta win in MSG. These fans today don't remember that. I remember that clearly. I was watching it. I was there. I remember it. That's where we want to get back to. But I was happy at the way that Julius answered that question. Let me see what else we had. Boom, boom. Yeah. Hold on. So I think Julius did really well by answering that question. Also, like how he said, let me see. I like the part of I think Julius has grown a lot with the New York Knicks. So I do like the part where he talked about the things that he learned not to do in New York. And he said, I learned not to do the thumbs down. And that's when I love the fact that he could laugh at himself. You know what I mean? And I love the fact that, once again, Julius has been real honest in recent years when talking to the media. He seems to be a little bit more comfortable in doing that. But when he talked about, what are some things not to do, he was like, I learned not to give a thumbs down in New York. He said, I was immature. And clearly, he's from Dallas. He was coming from spending time in LA and New Orleans. Oh, you didn't think you was going to get that smoke from New York fans when you do something like this to us? He said, my family went through it. I went through it. It's just like this whole thing. He said, the fans, everywhere I go. It was crazy. It was crazy. But I thought that was a good moment because I thought, like, yeah, mother flipper, you was going to get that. You was going to get that smoke. We want all the smoke. You was going to get that smoke. You thought shit was sweet? You gonna come in here and do this and think you gonna go home and have dinner? Like, nah, man, that is not happening. So that was a cool part of the interview, and it just kind of spoke to, and it led into them speaking about his experiences in New York. And he talked about, he was just like, yo, listen, man. He said, if you from the outside looking in, you think the media, it's like crazy and it's a lot of heat on you or whatever have you. And Paul George is asking about the fans, and his co-host was asking about the fans. And Julius told him, he was just like, nah, man, he said, in real life, like when I'm out and about, I moved to the city. He said, me and my family, I moved my family to the city. He said, I walk the streets like every other day, man. He was just like, yo, and it's all love. And I'm glad he cleaned it up. He said, it's all love, he says, not like that. They're showing love, then they're supportive or whatever. He said, but they will tell you if, what they're saying. And I'm glad he pointed that out because it almost felt as if New Yorkers would be hypocritical. And you know what? I think I'm mixing it up with what I heard on New York radio, who was responding to the interview as well. So I don't want to misquote it, but he said it's all love. The radio station was saying, yeah, Knicks fans change their tune when they see you in the street. But then the other co-host on that radio station, he was just like, yeah, that might be true, but New York fans will also tell you, like, yo, listen, I'm glad you got rid of that spin move, bruh. Your game took off when you got rid of that goddamn spin move. I know if I see him on the street, that's exactly what I'm gonna say, So him being in New York, his response to how the fans are and how the fans interact with him, I like how he responded to that. But those people, whether it's Paul George or whoever, need to know, like, listen, we're going to show you love. We're going to respect you, when we see you in person. But also, we're going to tell you, like, yo, bro, you need to get either in the gym and work on that handle or something. We will be honest with you as fans. But I like how he communicated his time, and he talked about it being tough. And he made mention of the fact that, you see a president come into office and they look all young and spry, and then 4 years later, they look all aged. And he talked about him being in New York and how it's aged him. He feels old as hell. And it's true, because heavy is the head that wears the crown. Heavy is the head that wears the crown. Be careful what you ask for. I said this on a previous video. If you want the top spot, you want to look at Kobe, you want to be the man. All of you want posters, your own posters, to be on the child's wall one day. Then you need to be able to deal with what comes with that. He talked a little bit about Kobe Bryant, and the stories, and they laughed and they think longingly and admirably towards the times when Kobe cursed somebody out, or Kobe went in there and called people soft as Charmin, or Kobe, Roy Hibbert was just like, you elbowed me in the face, and Kobe said, you should have got out the fucking way. Like, you admire stuff like that, but that's the type of dedication and grind and commitment it takes to be at that level. And it just speaks to that generation where it's just like, you want to be like the people on TV. You just don't want to be, I don't know, it's almost like you're trying to do something as opposed to just doing it. Okay? So, I was happy about him being honest about his experience and how he's experienced New York and how it's made him better. And he said that to his credit. He said all of that to everybody else. Everybody might be like, yo, I feel, I'm paraphrasing. Everybody else might be like, yo, I'm sorry for Jew. You know, I feel bad for what he's going through. He's just like, I know it's made me better. So whether he continues here with us or his next spot, he's going to take all of the lessons that he learned here in order to inform his success wherever he is. So I give him props for that. Wrapping up real quick, just a couple of other points. Let me see. He briefly talked about Tibbs, you know, and this is something that was funny. So Paul George was just like, yeah, you know, Coach Tibbs, and he talked about being on Team USA, and Coach Tibbs was in charge of the defense. And, you know, he was just like, yeah, man, you know, Tibbs is a beast, man, you know, he was in charge of the defense, and he had us out there really like running drills. And I'm looking at him like, chill, you know, chill. But yo, I love Tibbs, this, that, and the third. And Julius went on to talk a little bit about Tibbs, and he was just like, yeah, you know, Tibbs is a lifer with it. Tibbs is there watching film, this, that, and the third, blah, blah, blah. So they started talking about Tibbs. But once again, I felt like Sheik Luch when I was just like, let me look at these soft ass. You soft ass. When Paul George is talking about Tibbs. And he was saying, he said, Team USA, you know, he was in charge of the defense, and we were just like telling him, chill. That's not the mindset. I don't recall if that team he was on was the team with Kobe Bryant. Because he went up to Coach K, and he was just like, put me on the best defensive player. I don't need to score. We have LeBron on the team. I want to be a lockdown defender. Put me on the other team's best offensive player, and I'm going to shut him down. Like that type of mentality, I can't imagine Paul George being on that same team with a Kobe talking about chill when Tibbs is talking about defensive schemes. It's a mindset. It's a mindset of like, yo, I want to rely on my talents, and it doesn't mean we have to grind all the time. It just showed me that when that rumor was out there that, oh, there's a poll by NBA players who wants to pay for Tibbs and who don't want to play for Tibbs. I know Paul George was on that poll saying, let me pause, but he was on that, you know, voting poll of players who don't want to play for Tibbs because you don't want to work. That's why you're going to always be considered a soft player who can't get it done in the playoffs. I don't know. It's just a mentality, man. I'll be so happy when this generation phases out and retires. Because the type of mentality that JB has, if I could walk, I could play. Even the type of mentality that Julius has sometimes. I mean, at times. Because you know how he conserves his energy, but he conserves his energy because he knows it's nose to the grindstone. You know? But that type of mentality that Paul George, you know, is talking about, and you hear it in his questions or whatever, that's reflective of that entire generation, bro. That entire generation. So I'll be glad when them cats pack it up and we can celebrate them and they get their, you know, their off gold jackets, whatever it is. I'll be glad when they go on, bro, because that spoke to it, you know. And to Julius's credit, he was just like, no, man, like, yo, Tibbs, when he came on and Leon and them came on, you know, they gave me confidence. You know, they talked just about, you know, what it took. They set the standard and they set the culture. And he was comfortable in that culture to be himself. What he didn't say was, they told him, like, you're the engine, you know? So they kind of conceded to his ego a little bit and was just like, yo, you're the man for us. So it ultimately led to many of the problems we have today, but it helped us reset what the expectations were. And we did utilize him as the engine to help get to that first playoff run. All right, so and the second. So you can't understate that as well. But soft as shaman as Paul George talking about Tibbs, you know. Once again, when you have those type of players serving in the role that they play in the NBA, other young players that are coming up, they pay attention to that. And that becomes the norm because those players who they looked up to see Tibbs as that. So I look forward to a time where we have a new generation who has a different mindset, who breaks away from that previous era mindset and start thinking for themselves. And the New York Knicks, because of their age, is part of that new era that's coming up and pushing out that old era and those old mindsets. And I got one last thing. I think Julius also talked about Tibbs being the reason he succeeded because he's a worker. And that was one of his counters to Paul Pierce. He was just like, yo, one reason I was successful is because me and Tibbs, we think alike. He said, I would come back in for work in the evening and Tibbs would still be there. Like all day. He was just like, yo, he's a lifer with this thing. And to me, that was a moment that showed the difference between even Julius Randle and Paul George. Paul George's attitude was just like, yeah, he's a grinder. Julius was just like, that was right up my alley, man, because he was still there when I'm there. And I thought it was even funny because, you know, Paul George took this opportunity to talk about the owner that the Clippers had, Hal Boma, and it came out of nowhere. It came out of left field. And it was almost like he asked all these questions to Julius, and Julius answered them so well that he had to at least find something that was good about his team that he could trump Julius with. So he started talking about Steve Ballmer, and he taught me about business, and he showed me how he does it. And, you know, I think it's awesome that I have a direct connection with the owner. And Julius couldn't say too much about that. So it's almost like throwing these things at you, thinking that you may have a woe is me type of response. But you talking about like how, yo, it's better than a lot of people who are not part of it thinks it is. So you had to throw the Steve Ballmer, the owner, point out there as well. So I thought, I was just like, yeah, Ninja, we see what you're doing. We see what you're doing. So let me see services. So I think that's about it. Paul, and I'll end on this. Paul George also made a point when Julius talked about having one of his best seasons this past season. He said, I think another reason you may not be mentioning is that when you went to New York, the type of seasons that you had where you elevated your game, you were able to receive more opportunities. You were in a situation where you received more exposure and you were able to have more experiences, not only to succeed, but to fail. And he said, those are some of the things that contribute to your success in this league. And I wrote that down because I thought that is 100% facts. And my message to us as Knicks fans, my message to the SB community, Knicks Nation, the KD community here on Knicks Daily, is to keep that in mind when we're looking at IQ and his performance in these past playoffs. When we're looking at Quentin Grimes as a young player coming up on our team. When we're looking at a Julius Randle, if we decide to move forward with him and keep him on this team. Every one of those heartache moments, we're living vicariously through their play. They're living this thing. They have to go spend time or see those same opponents in vacation spots when they're trying to let off steam with their families. They're reminded of it every day. But it's another year where we have an opportunity to get better. Even Paul George said it. He said, bro, that's 1 year with with Jalen Brunson. And you had the type of bounce back season. Imagine how it's going to be moving forward with more time with him. More time when y'all working on y'all games with each other in mind. Imagine what that looks like. Imagine what that looks like for Jalen Brunson and Quentin Grimes having another year playing together, with IQ and Jalen Brunson having another year playing together, with RJ and Jalen Brunson having another game playing together, having another year, having been exposed to each other, having another year going through the experience of, navigating a season, trying to remain healthy, winning games, getting to the playoffs, trying to go further than you went last year. Imagine another year together, what that's going to look like. So that was a great point. Overall, even in doing this breakdown, I think it's a better interview than I expected it to be. I thought it was really good. I mean, it was soft as hell, bro. I'm sorry. Paul George is just soft. That's why when people were talking about bringing him here, bringing Miles Turner, bringing Karl Anthony Towns, them ninjas is soft, bro. You can poo-poo what you want or will with a player like Julius. Julius has shown, he has moments where mentally he's soft, but he's a tough kid. He's a tough player, bro. He is tough. Zion, y'all say what y'all want. Yo, Zion is a tough kid. He's a He's a beast if he's healthy. But that's for another day because I'm on the clock. Keep this in mind, same thing applies to life, that applies to our team. If there's no struggle, there's no progress. I'm going to be doing videos all week, so check me out. But I hope you enjoyed this breakdown and my reaction of that Julius Randle interview. If you haven't checked it out already, put the earbud in, check it out. It's something good to listen to during lunch break. It was all right. And Julius did well, representing himself as well as the organization well as well. Okay? Keep this in mind. If there's no struggle, there's no progress. And always understand this. At Knicks Deli, everybody eats. Peace.